Welcome back. And today we're going to be reviewing the movie Frankenstein. That's the new film over on Netflix. And I will say it is a ambitious reimagining of the classic Mary Shelley's Frankenstein story. This movie turned your, classic horror story into a emotional family drama. It is a story about a creator and a creation. It's a father and son story at its core. It's about a neglected child that experiences family trauma and grows into a brilliant doctor one day, and he eventually creates something that he becomes a father figure to, and in my opinion repeats a lot of the same patterns that he experienced as a child himself. It this movie has it takes us through tragic cycles of parenthood, of family, of togetherness, to a degree. It's not your standard monster movie. It's not your monster jump scares and killing and blood and gore. This is very much so. There is a monster in this movie, but this is very much so a coming of age story showing how a child, and to a degree, could experience neglect and hurt and want to lash back out at the world for what they've gone through and what they're experiencing. This Frankenstein story, in my opinion, I would call it heartbreaking versus being scary. It gives a very deep emotional tug that almost makes you feel bad for the characters involved in this story. And with that, I'll say this is a period piece. It was in the 1850s. Like I said, it's a Gothic family tragedy drama with themes of neglect, ambition, ego, all the things that, every person, every family has, especially families that may be poor, families that may be rich. They have different cycles of how family is raised, if I'm using that term correctly, how you would raise a family, how you would teach a child ambition, how you would teach your son or your daughter how to care about a person. This story brings in all of that in a very different way, obviously, because we all know Frankenstein to be a horror movie. But this, while still being a horror-ish movie, it has horror themes, is very much a drama. So I won't spoil much of the movie, but because I want everybody to go check this out, I think it's definitely worth to watch. While long, and I feel like it had to be long because it gives us a prelude, which basically shows us in 1857, we see a broken and beaten down Victor Frankenstein trapped on ice in the middle of nowhere in the north somewhere. I think it said the farthermost north, but a ship happens upon him that's stuck in the ice. They bring him on board, and after they kind of nurse him back to health, he starts telling his tale, which is chapter one of the story, Victor's tale, and it starts with him as a child. And before I get into that, he warns the crew after a pretty good fight scene. He warns the crew that you cannot kill him. So as we're getting into chapter one and we get into Victor's tale, we see him as a child and with his father, and how he feels like a neglected son, and how he's closer to his mother who's pregnant with another kid, and how his father seems to be very much more excited about this child than he is the son that he has sitting right in front of him. After this child is born, the mother dies, and I won't get into much more detail on that, but Victor is now raised by his father with his brother, obviously, and he sees his father treat his brother a certain type of way, some would say better, and he feels neglected, and he wants to prove to his father that he's every bit of the smart man and genius that he looks up to his father to be. At one point he tells his father that he's going to grow to be smarter than him and beat death, because he's traumatized by the death of his mother, and he's going to find a way to, basically nobody ever has to die again. And it goes into him as an adult, and it opens with him at I'll call it a theater, and he's putting on an experiment and showing at this point how he's learned to maybe reanimate a dead figure. But he was very much raised by a harsh father, and he took those lessons with him in life. And now he's an adult, and he's trying to fit into society, but a society that he doesn't fit in because he has a big ego, and he's also kind of lashing back at society because I think he feels dismissed by society. But as the story goes on, he eventually meets back up with his brother who's attached to a wealthy family now, and it provides him a way to further his experiments. Just so happens that his brother's fiance, her uncle, is sick, and he has an ulterior motive. He wants to not die. He wants to be the person that is saved by Victor's experiment of potentially not dying and reanimating or never dying or having some sort of immortality. So as the creature awakens further into the story, we see that the creature, while very, very large in scale, and it has a brain, an adult brain, but we learn that he is very much a child and maybe even a baby in a sense, and needs to be trained and needs to be taken care of. And Victor, not being the best father figure, in my opinion, doesn't do a very good job as this. And we all know that every child is looking for acceptance. And in this story, the creature is very much so looking for acceptance, while Victor is looking for perfection. And Victor stresses and stresses to the creature that, he wants it to be smart. And then when the creature isn't progressing the way that Victor would have wanted it to, he looks at himself as a failure, and he thinks that there's no other way out. And he honestly kind of starts repeating some of the same things his father did. And he's harsh towards the creature, and he keeps the creature locked away from society. And he doesn't nurture this childlike figure in any way, as you'll see from some of the ramifications of Victor's decisions, a cycle of trauma that a parent can put onto a child, and that a child can grow into an adult and put onto their child. And at some point, the cycle has to break. And that's basically most of the portion from Victor's tale. The creature eventually gets on the boat and confronts Victor and basically tells him that, he wanted acceptance and he also wants a partner, but he wanted to be accepted. And then we get into the creature's tale because he learns that Victor told his tale, so he wants to tell his side of the story too. So we see the creature as he leaves the castle where he was created after it was destroyed, and he has to battle elements in the weather. He has to escape trouble from people that are trying to potentially kill him because they don't know what he is. And he hides, and he is very much like an animal, and maybe kind of how you would say the prehistoric humans were, where he was basically in survival mode. He survived by any means necessary. He eventually finds a house with a family, and we hear in his story how he always wanted a family because he's narrating his side of the story, how Victor narrated the prelude and also Victor's tale. So the creature's narrating his tale, and we see that he's longing for family and that he is a child of neglect and just wants to be accepted. And there's this old man that is blind, but he senses the creature, and he, while teaching his granddaughter, I assume, he's also teaching the creature at the same time, teaching him words. The creature is seeing kindness in a family and wants to be a part of that family. So he starts doing things around the farm, and that help the family out. And does this part make you guys, if you've seen the film and when you see the film, when seeing the creature's tale and seeing this part where he wants to be a part of his family, does it make you feel bad for him in a sense to where you're not even looking at him like a monster. We're looking at him like this is a child or a young man that is just has been abandoned by his family and just wants to be accepted by anybody. And when he finds some form of acceptance in his new friend and the old man, and he learns about Adam and Eve and the creation story, and he compares it to his own life, and he just wants to be accepted, just like any child would. And that's basically what Frankenstein the movie is. This version of it. It is a tragic story. It's a story where basically everybody is a victim. We see that at one moment in the story where Victor's I guess we can call his future sister-in-law, where they have interactions that may be a little inappropriate, but once she further into the story learns about the creature and how her and the creature bond, and that's kind of the creature's first connection. And where I thought it was more of a mother-like connection, maybe it was a love connection where she saw and empathized for what she felt a soul inside of the creature, and she wanted to nurture it, and the creature obviously wanted to be nurtured because it felt neglected and also was in a childlike state. At one point in the story, the creature seeks companionship, and I mentioned that earlier, and Victor very much so denies him companionship. And I'm not sure if it's because Victor never really had a companion, and the only time that he felt like he wanted companionship was with his brother's fiance. So I'm not sure if because he couldn't have what he wanted, ultimately he denied the creature of the same thing, or was it because he looked at the creature as a creature and not as a life that he brought into the world? But the final act is basically a full circle moment. It brings us back to the ice, and we see how and why Victor is beaten and battered and on the ice and basically left for dead. And the film ends with Victor still denying the creature companionship and somebody who he could spend the rest of his life with because he cannot die. It also ends with the creature forgiving Victor, as a lot of kids of neglect and abused homes and kids that in many ways outgrow their parents, they forgive them for the way that they raised them at that time. Kids experience it now. If your parent comes from a different generation, that's just how that generation is, or whatever the case may be. And then as each generation progresses, the parenting kind of progresses with it. We realize that kids have emotions and need nurturing and stuff, while parents of the past were more caretakers and providers and maybe didn't lean into the emotions. But this Frankenstein movie very much so at a time in the 1850s, I'm sure, where especially males didn't lean into the emotions of their, definitely not their sons. I'm not sure about their daughters, but for this story purpose, the male characters did not lean into the emotions of their sons, and they very much were these strong men that you had to be a certain type of way and a strong man. And I think Victor's father kind of resented him in a way because he was very, very intelligent, but not necessarily tough. And I think that may have been one of the reasons he wanted to raise this second son by himself, because I believe that Victor's father allowed his mom to die. I don't think he tried to save him because he's supposed to be this great surgeon. And I'll just leave that part at that. But manipulation, just family manipulation, and just the tragedy that can come from it. And that's everything that Frankenstein, this film, was a very, very deep dive into family trauma, family tragedy, neglect, ambition, ego. The film had Gothic visuals and, with the dark castle, the stormy weather, has childhood trauma that empowers Victor, and it also empowers the creature as we get into his tale, and as his story unfolds more, we get into the childhood trauma. We have the tragic deaths of eventually Elizabeth, who I didn't know if this story was going to try to lean into a Bride of Frankenstein, but you'll see what it does. But Elizabeth tragically dies while trying to protect the creature from Victor. And the creature has so much empathy that he did not learn from his father, who he looked how he learned so much empathy that he did not learn from his father or father figure, who was Victor. And then there's this big emotional ending, like I said, with the creature's acceptance and his forgiveness of Victor for how Victor treated him, because in the end, Victor sees that he did create an intelligent creature. He just was very impatient, how some parents are, because he wanted something when he wanted it, rather than trying to nurture it and foster it and make it grow. So that's my verdict, and that's my opinion on the new Frankenstein movie. I do not think that you should miss it. I think it is very much worth the watch. Like I said, it's a little long, a little drawn out, but I think it's needed to tell this type of story the way that they did, or the way that Del Toro did. He did a great job. Oscar Isaac is a phenomenal actor. He did a great job in this story as Victor. Jacob Elordi playing the creature was fantastic. I guess you would call an adult, or I would call him an adult. And the way that he's grown differently from how his father was grown, and how he took the lessons that he learned from his father, aka Victor, and saw a surrogate family that didn't necessarily give him love directly, but they did give him food, they gave him clothes and stuff like that. So they showed him love, and how rather than choosing rage and to be a killer or to be a monster, he chose to be a helper and the spirit of the forest. And it was a great movie. Great movie. I suggest everybody watch it. I think this was a very good watch, worth the 2.5 hours that it was. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments about it. Which performance in this film like hit you the hardest? Was it the performance of Victor and how he went from a child to an adult, and to basically being a version of his father that may have been kind of worse than what his father was to him? What do you think about the creatures in general? But what do you think about the creature by the time you get to the final act? Do you sympathize for him or empathize for the creature in a way you would for a child that you see being mistreated or neglected? Do you feel that same way about the creature by the time you get to the end of this film? How does the father versus son dynamic that this film takes on shape the way you looked at the film? Because I think most are probably going to approach it as, oh, this is another horror movie or a monster movie. But once we get into it and you see that this is a tragic drama, how does that father son dynamic shift? Does it make you sympathetic as well, or how does that make you look at the dynamics between Victor and his father, and then Victor and the creature, and then from the creature to Victor? How does that make you look at the dynamics that played out and the way they played out through the movie and into the way the ending played with the acceptance and the forgiveness of a son to a father, and showing that even though you didn't raise me that well and you didn't show me that much love, I forgive you for all of that, and I'm still here for you in the end. But that is Frankenstein. Frankenstein was a great film. Go check it out on Netflix. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I'll be back with you shortly with more content, and keep on coming by. If you have any suggestions for me, please feel free to drop them. But I really do want to know what you guys think and feel about this film. Like I said, drop a comment. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate you for coming, and I will see you next time. Bye.